So I'll go ahead and start. My name is Dan Preby, and I am an actuary. I grew up in the health field, so I've been an actuary now for about 25 years.
My name is Jim Miles. I've been a volunteer in the education system since the year after I became a fellow, became a fellow in 1980, so a long time ago.
Okay, hi, I'm Stuart Klugman. I'm currently a staff fellow working for the Society of Actuaries. Been doing that since 2009. So some things to do. So these are sort of tips for you from our experience and particularly from the experience of our item writers, graders, syllabus creators. So review the introductory study note. So there's really two things. There's a syllabus document, but there's always a link to an introductory study note that has additional information. It's very exam specific, so I can't tell you what necessarily might be in one versus another. Hey, review that case study. If there's a case study, there will be questions on it. That's for sure. We don't have a set proportion of the number of points that must be case study questions, but it will be enough points that if you don't do well on them, it could make a huge difference in your success. I mentioned before, read the original syllabus material. If you want to use third-party study guides, that's just fine, but your best bet is to start with the same things the graders are reading, and learn from the material that they're going to be crafting questions from. And then move on to figure out some other ways to enhance your understanding and your ability to do well. Review the prior exams. Now, the interesting thing is about the prior exams is I mentioned before facetiously, but you don't want to use the prior exams exclusively as a way to learn things. Oh, that's how you solve that kind of problem. Because you may or may not see that kind of problem again, but as a way to see, particularly from the model solution, how we expect you to solve problems like that can be very informative. To get a notion of how the folks that wrote the question and the people who grade them look at the model solutions. Are we doing more on model solutions later? Yeah, so we'll have a little session before we're done on how we view model solutions, how they're constructed, and how you're to interpret them. Getting some help, never a bad idea. During the exam, now I know we've talked about a lot of these things repeatedly, so the fact that they're here means we think they're very important. Read the question carefully and thoroughly. Make sure you do that thinking time to know what it is that's being asked and what you need to answer. Pay attention to the points. Pay attention to the verbs. Plan your answer. Don't just start writing away without a goal in mind. Figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to go about doing it, and then start writing. Consider sketching an outline. And you could do this one of two ways. You could always do it on the side or on some scratch paper or on some pages you'll never turn in. Or you could put the outline into your solution, but then leave enough space to go back and fill in the details afterwards. So that kind of depends on the question and your style. Some more things. The STEM is critical. We can't emphasize this enough, because when you're aiming for a higher cognitive level, you achieve that by asking a candidate to put your response into the context of the question. So which two of the five are best may well depend on the context in which that you've just been put into. So pay attention and use that information. As is also said, if information was put in there, it was put in for a reason that is important for guiding your answer. Case study questions, even more so. Make sure the facts of the case study guide the answer you give, and that it's relevant to the situations that the case study company is facing. This sounds so obvious, the next two. Present both sides of a question when discussed. If it says discuss, don't just discuss the right thing to do, discuss the aspects of the question. And if you're asked to choose, make a choice. And you'd be surprised how many times we see people just discuss, give alternatives, but they don't propose, they don't recommend, and they don't take that final step. And remember, again, that's the high cognitive level, making the choice, so that's where the points are also. And so that's where you want to really gain a lot of points and be successful. Okay, again, answer the question that was asked. So again, think carefully. Don't start writing and just saying, oh yeah, I know all about that subject. Nothing's too obvious to ignore. Some things are so basic, but if they're part of an appropriate response, put it in. Don't just say, oh, that's so elementary, they wouldn't be expecting me to write that.
And that may come into play more if you're experienced and you're practicing in a particular area and you know a lot. You may just not think of the details. You're thinking of the higher level things and forgetting the details. Let me give you points.
And you can only get partial credit if you give a partial answer. So explain what you're doing so that even if you're on the wrong track, some of your right ideas will still get credit. By the way, on calculation, we didn't mention, it's only on the front page of your booklet. It's often not in the questions, but it does say on the front page, which means it applies everywhere. When you calculate, show your work. So you're expected to show your work anytime you calculate. Now, I know that can raise a question, well, how much work should I show? And that's a difficult one, but my advice would be at least show the formula you're using so that you gave an indication that you knew how the problem was to be solved, and show some intermediate steps as appropriate. We don't mean show every intermediate calculation. So if 3 numbers are to be added, you don't first have to add 2 of them and then add the 3rd one afterward. So the kind of stuff that could be punched into a calculator, no, you don't have to go show those details. Any other comments on
Well, I think it's important, like show the formula and then some indication, which parameters or assumptions or values went into which parts of the formula. Maybe just replace all the letters with numbers would be one way to do it.
Right. So in some of the examples that we've seen in health insurance, for instance, calculating out a reserve. And you'll need a claims triangle to do it, and you have to calculate out certain factors for that. And some of the questions may be for calculating out for the last 6 months these factors and then calculate out the total reserve. And so what we've seen candidates do is they'll write out the first one. They'll say month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They'll write out the first one, calculate out the factor, and then simply calculate out the factors for the rest of them. So they're not writing everything out, okay? And that's fair game to do. But as Stuart and Jim have both mentioned, I think it's very important to write out a formula if there's one. I mean, I'll say if there's one that applies. There always is one that applies. But always write out the formula, and then the major steps, write them out. We've seen some real messy papers that have ones where it'll start up here, the candidate will point an arrow down here, and it'll go back up here. The graders have to follow that, and they do actually. They'll follow whatever you're telling them to do. So again, make sure that you're writing the important components out. The other thing to keep in mind, again, from the grading standpoint, is if you do have a calculation that you don't want to then, or that you think is incorrect, and don't erase it. Just go ahead and cross it off, or start on a new page. If things are crossed off, the grader will not look at that. Okay.
More. Number your pages. Be clear whether it's Part A, Part B, Part C. So, for those of you who've done these before or about to, on every sheet of paper you put your candidate number. In the upper left-hand corner you put the question number. And then within the question you should put the letter part you're answering so the grader knows what is where. And a question you might be asking is, what if I forget? Well, if you forget, you might get lucky. I don't know how many thousands of pages of solutions get mailed into the SOA at the completion of an exam cycle. I know we ship like 30 tons of stuff out. I'm not sure how much comes back, but so we've got an assembly line of people opening those envelopes, sorting your papers. We scan every one when it comes in. So in case, as the papers get mailed around to the graders, we always have a scanned copy in the office for a backup. If they spot a missing candidate number on some of the pages, we'll fill it in as long as it's still been attached to the rest of it. If there's a question number missing, but it's obvious that the papers are all in order and this must be 6, we'll try our best. But we can't guarantee that we can recover from your mistake in not putting those simple pieces of information on each page. Write clearly and legibly. I know that's a challenge. So write clearly and legibly enough so that someone else can read it. The graders can only work with what's put in front of them. They'll make every attempt to decipher your handwriting, but at some point they will give up. And if they just can't figure out what that word is, they'll just have to not consider it because they don't know what they're reading. So make their life as easy as you can in doing that. Be as logical. This goes back to the table of the 4 by 2. It doesn't matter what the order is, but your order should be obvious enough that they say, okay, now I'm talking about the participants, now I'm talking about the sponsor, now I'm talking about this risk, now I'm talking about that risk. And as long as it's clear what you're talking about where, they can figure that out. But if it's all fuzzy and you're just writing down things as they pop into your head, they may not be able to keep track of what's where and which parts of your answer belong to which parts of the question. If you write more than is necessary, that's okay. You won't be penalized for putting in things that are beyond what was asked for. You're hurting yourself by spending more time on it, but it doesn't lower your score. The only time you can lose points by writing too much is if you're self-contradictory. And so occasionally you'll see somebody recommending both sides or saying two things that are just opposed in the hope that, well, one of them's got to be right. That they'll catch, and you can't get away with that one. But if you write some extraneous things, they don't take negative points for being off topic. So if you're making a list and some of the things you list aren't relevant, you won't lose points. Now, if the question said list 3 things, and one of those 3 things is irrelevant, obviously you won't get full credit. But if you're not told how many to list, and your list is longer than necessary and contains some irrelevant items, that's okay. Am I right?
For the most part.
For the most part.
The answer is yes, for the most part. So there are some situations where writing too much actually could hurt. So let's say that you have a list of 10 things, and only 5 of them apply to the STEM. The question may actually be, it typically will not say, there are 10 things. What it will do is say, of all the things that, of the list of whatever, which ones apply in this situation and describe them. And so it's up to you to pick the 5 that actually apply. And we have seen situations where a candidate and several candidates wrote all 10 of them. And actually that does not demonstrate that they know the knowledge or that they know the material. So they're actually hurt by writing all 10 things. Okay, so in those situations, you want to make sure that you're discerning which ones are the appropriate ones.
So this isn't a good example per se, but if they wrote down 4 that were right, they'd probably get more points than putting all 10 down, given that we only asked for 5.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Because that candidate that wrote 4 demonstrated that they knew the material. The person who wrote all 10 did not. Okay, now on the other hand, let's say that the person who wrote all 10 wrote all 10 of them and then said that only these 4 apply. They'd probably get about the same as what the original or the candidate who only wrote 4 would receive, the number of points.
Okay, so those are all good things. Here's a few not so good things. Again, if you put extra stuff in it, it only hurts you for the time you spend. But the graders are not looking for you to show your incredible knowledge of the learning objective or learning outcome that question relates to. What they're looking for is your answer to the specific question that was put in front of you. So demonstrating all this extra knowledge won't get you any extra points and may take away from your ability to do well elsewhere.
And I think, Stuart, going back to our era of taking exams, that was a valid strategy, right? Just to dump stuff on because you're going to get points. But the exams have changed, and that dumping strategy isn't a very good strategy anymore.
Yeah. And again, because it's not a good way to demonstrate your higher cognitive level that we're after with the verbs that are in the question. So you're probably not addressing the question that was asked these days if you just let the grader into everything you know. And I might say, for those of you who've been through the Fundamentals of Actuarial Practice course, both Jim and I have worked with a lot of final assessments and papers, and we see a lot of that there too, and it's not a good habit, where instead of focusing on what from what I've learned helps me answer the question that's in front of me, I'm just showing off, oh, this is a question about this. I'm going to write everything I've learned about it. And we said there's no tricks. There really aren't. As I think it was Jim who pointed out, the question numbers are graded separately. The question letters are graded together. And I've already mentioned about true and false. Don't hedge. If you're asked to recommend something, don't say, well, I think it should be like this, but maybe it should be like that. But if circumstances were like this, I'd probably choose this other thing. We recognize that life is probably more like that. And oftentimes you do recommend alternatives or try to give a complete picture. But we also have to understand that an exam is a little bit of a pretend environment. Even with a case study, it's still a pretend company where you only have certain pieces of information about it. So you put yourself in this scenario where this is the information you have, you're asked to take a stand, and you need to do so. So play the game with us. If we ask you to do something, go ahead and do it. As you know, when time is called, your pencil should be put down, or pens, or whatever you're writing with. It's the one thing that automatically, a few things get your paper automatically disqualified, and writing after time is one of them.
And it's true, I think, that my paper wouldn't even be graded. If the proctor reported that I'd written after time was called, my paper is pulled and not graded. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah, so there's two things. The other thing that automatically disqualifies you is if you don't sign your the envelope in which you put your papers. There's a place for your signature. If you fail to sign it, your papers will not be graded.